Greetings and welcome back to my channel. Bit of a change of subject for this video, but one very relevant to me just recently. Allow me to provide a little bit of context. Now, most photographers, regardless of their genre, at some point consider putting on an exhibition of their work. The reasons for doing so will be varied, perhaps to increase their profile or maybe just to put their images in front of the public to see what the reaction and the feedback is like. Over the years, I've been involved in a number of exhibitions, mostly partnering with other photographers to share the cost, so I'm aware firsthand of the planning and thought that needs to go into putting your work on a wall in front of the public eye. Now, here in the county of Dorset in England, a charity organises an open studios event that takes place every 2 years. The principle is simple, offering artists across the county the opportunity to open up their studios for a couple of weeks and invite the public in to see their work and of course see them at work. Now, the charity collects details about the artists and then over a given 2-week period advertises all those artists that want to take part, and in a variety of forms. The event also allows artists to get together in halls or other large locations and hold exhibition-style presentations, and this is a style that suits many photographers who don't have a large studio space in order to open up. Now, in 2018, I was lucky enough to be asked to join a small group of artists in a converted barn, showing my work alongside a painter, 2 sculptors, a fabric weaver, a woodworker and another photographer. The principle was to create a space with a variety of work to look at, and the hope was that the variety would create visitor interest, and indeed it worked. The 2018 fortnight was very successful with lots of interest, also quite a few sales, at least enough to actually cover the cost of being involved. Now, in 2020, Dorset Art Weeks, as it's called, didn't go ahead because of the COVID pandemic lockdown measures in place at the time. In 2021, there was an effort by the charity to host a virtual event, but I decided that that really wasn't going to work for me. So along comes this year, 2022, and this time the fortnight running as I remembered in 2018. And again, the small group in the barn were happy to have me along. In 2022, we had a similar mix of artists, this time 2 sculptors, a different painter, a digital artist, a bookbinder, a dressmaker, and myself and another photographer. Having been through the process in 2018, I was keen to implement some of the ideas that I'd had as a result of being involved in 2018. One of those ideas was to feature images created in the county of Dorset and put them centre stage. This was something that I picked up on last time, with visitors asking me whether a scene that they were looking at was in Dorset, and seeing their disappointment when they discovered that it was in the Lake District or some other place that I'd visited. So as a result, several of the frames that I had were cleaned and reassembled, but this time featuring a Dorset location image instead. Choosing which images to use was a consideration here. There's lots of literature and content out there about the types of pictures that appeal and ultimately sell. The general consensus is that a picture containing warm colours, that brightens up a space, that makes it more inviting and a cheery place to be, they tend to be more attractive. Unless somebody has a particular attraction to a place or a particular combination of colours or shapes, generally it's the more cheery images that people choose to hang on their walls. So I try to include this rationale in my choice of images to mount or frame in order to include on my wall. Additionally, this year, in addition to the obligatory greetings cards, I decided to create a 2023 calendar featuring Dorset Images. I've done this before to give to friends or relations as gifts, so I had the software, I had the kit, and it was quite straightforward for me to create and bind a wire-bound calendar. Because I was printing and binding these things myself, I could keep the production numbers low and make an initial batch just to test the water with the idea. In 2018, I'd also decided that my wall needed a large signature statement, something that would attract attention and encourage visitors to look and engaged. So I used a Christmas and New Year's special offer from one of those online printing companies to have a few large, over 1 metre wide canvas produced in order to serve as that statement. And you'll see these items shortly. In addition to the images, there's then the labels, pricing, a wall hanging plan, as well as what tables and furniture I will need to bring along with me in order to house greetings cards, mounted prints, and of course show off the calendars. Setup day can really be quite stressful. First of all, we had a day where we cleared the barn and repainted the walls in order to smarten the space up. At the same time, I was able to measure the wall space in order to create something of a wall hanging plan rather than just making it up on the day. In 2018, due to some personal commitments, I had to do my setup on the opening day, getting there as early as I could. However, back then I was still getting my walls sorted out when our first visitors arrived. This year, in 2022, I deliberately made sure that I was able to use some time the day before to take the pressure away from the opening day. Hopefully you can see the statement pieces that I talked about earlier mounted in the centre of the space, hopefully acting to attract interest in everything else that I had to show. Frames were mounted using proper hangers, as if they were mounted onto somebody's wall in somebody's home, and the mounted prints secured using pins with transparent plastic heads and using enough pins to hold the mount flat against the wall. Although we didn't know it at the time, the afternoon we opened set the scene for the entire 2 weeks. In 2018, our opening day was extremely busy with lots of visitors and lots of activity. In 2022, although busy at times, the footfall was noticeably down, and there were short periods where we, the artists, were all standing around in an empty space. We also noticed that purchases were a lot more considered, with smaller, cheaper products a lot more popular. In 2018, mounted and framed images were regularly coming down off the wall to find new homes, with me then either having to produce new ones that evening or find something out of the print browsers in order to take its place. Thank heavens I chose to make some calendars, as it was these that were regularly being picked up and taken away. So much so, I actually produced another batch towards the end of the 2022 fortnight. The other positive was the engagement and interest that we were all experiencing from visitors. So the 2 weeks was full of conversation about, from my perspective, art and photography and approaches, and what images I was showing was saying to the visitor. I also had a smattering of interest in photographic workshops, with several information sheets being taken away. However, I know from experience that turning that conversation into agreeing a day out is actually relatively rare. At the end of the 2 weeks, all the calendars that I had made, including the extra batch, had been sold, and this alone just about enabled me to cover the cost of the fees to be a part of the event. Also, most of the Dorset-based image greetings cards also found new homes, hopefully to be enjoyed by their recipients. In an image browser, I had a collection of older work, all mounted and ready for framing. These had already been heavily discounted, and just over half of them were picked up by new owners. But for the larger images, only 4 came down off the wall. And those large statement canvases, despite working as a visitor draw, and despite being quite heavily discounted towards the end of the last week, ultimately they all came home with me. Unfortunately, I think the 2022 event was impacted by the sharp rises in utility bills and the cost of living, and just the cost of putting fuel in the car to tour the event. As ever, if there was another time, I'd go about it slightly differently. Maybe have that large statement, but then doing it in such a way that I didn't have to worry about storing it afterwards. Maybe a large print that could be rolled up and stored in a large tube instead of a flat canvas. And I'd have a variety of smaller prints of Dorset scenes. the kinds of things that could be sold at a reasonable cost but also collect a reasonable margin, and maybe a greater variety of Dorset-based greetings cards rather than just having cards featuring colourful scenes of the county. Those days that we were both busy I thoroughly enjoyed, and I would like to thank all the visitors we had for both their interest and their support. I need to have a think about whether I'm going to do this again in 2024, and I'm hoping my experience this year doesn't put anyone else off hosting their own exhibitions of their work. Doing so is an exciting and very time-consuming undertaking, but if you get the footfall and public interest, it can also be very rewarding. That's it for this video. I hope that my story of Dorset Art Weeks 2022 has been of interest, perhaps inspiring enough for others to give this sort of thing a try. So until the next video, everybody stay safe and stay well, and keep exploring with your camera. Cheerio for now.